the poet. Do you
Whatever.
like to introduce yourself? Because we have your bio up on the presentation, but I, I also just like to hear the poet and talk about themselves and this is their space. So I might just pass over to you so you can introduce
Okay.
yourself.
It's a little
I'll say a
scary.
little
I'm
bit.
always like uncomfortable.
I'll say a little bit. I'll introduce you. We have your bio and and you can add more if you want. And if you don't, we'll jump right into it. So no
Okay.
worries. Yeah. You're funny. Oh my gosh. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send you a direct chat. So you just have the questions in front of you.
Okay. Thank you.
Um, yeah. Because I know that sometimes just saying it, we forget, but you can have it in front of you when the time comes. Okay, so we'll just begin. Melanie, you can show the presentation now. And this will be edited, so none of this will be posted. This part won't be posted,
Okay,
Chloe.
because I'm like awkward from the start. Loved it for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, no worries, no worries. Yeah, I'm so excited.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's a nice presentation. Awesome. Yes. It's at the bottom, if you want it in the presentation form. Do you see it at the bottom, Melanie? Oh, there it's at the top too, I guess. Awesome. Wonderful. We can begin. Welcome, welcome everyone. Welcome, Claudia. We're so excited. Nidus is so excited to have you on this platform and to share your knowledge and all the insight that you've gathered over the years in the work that you do, right? So for Nidus Poetry Relief and Release, we want to introduce Claudia, who is a poet, writer, and educator. And we're gonna be talking about what she does, right? So she is a Latina writer, poet, educator, and editor from the Bronx. She'll be using her poetry to express emotion, overcome traumas, and inspire others to do the same. She's in the programs assistant at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, one of my favorite places, and shares her poetry through a monthly newsletter, social media, at cap.writes. Her chapbook stories, poems, and I wrote while turning pain into hope and other published work can be found on cap/writes.com. And she'll talk a little bit about her work and where you can find it and where you can read some of her latest publications a little later on. So I want to begin, Claudia, with why do you write poetry? How did you arrive to poetry?
Oh man. Well, first, hi. Thank you for having me. Um, so I actually wrote my first poem when I was in first grade. I remember I was in the car with my mom and I said something silly that rhymed, and she's like, "Oh, you should write a poem." And I was like, "What?" And so from that conversation sparked my interest, and I realized that like poetry is everywhere, especially in music. I came from a very artsy fartsy family. Music was always so big in our home. Um, and so listening to a lot of like melodic music that had very simple lyrics that are always like rhymey and sweet, like that's really where my love of poetry came from. And then as I got older, I started taking writing more seriously. And then life starts happening. And so now I have something to talk about and things to express. And so by high school was when I really started writing a lot more. I wrote my first book in high school. And like I say that, but it cannot be found out in the world. Like I was always so scared to like really push my voice out there. Um, and so then poetry kind of re-sparked within my adulthood again, although it never left me. I guess I just never took it serious up until a few years ago. And I am a teacher by trade, but after COVID and all of the different impacts of that, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need to follow where my heart is, and my heart is in the arts. And so that's how I ended up doing my poetry and writing and like freelancing full time, to just focus on the craft of it all and like chase where the joy is leading me.
I
Um,
I love that because so as you know we're talking about health equity and a lot of the challenges that the Hispanic community, Latino community, Latinx community that we face daily and specifically talking about New York City, right? So like you know, I was writing a lot of poetry in high school and this led me to a path to see what my future looked like if I stepped into thinking about healing or looking for help or asking questions on things that I didn't know, right? And I want to talk about what has poetry given you access to, right? Because we're talking about mental health and we're talking about artists and poets specifically, how they engage in that space of access, right? So talk a little bit about that, your experience on reaching some of these conclusions on the state of mental health in our community, right?
yeah. I mean, I'm the type of person that it takes me quite a while to really process how I'm feeling. So in that, it also took a lot of effort to even articulate it. So even if I knew kind of what I was feeling, I didn't have the words for it. And so a lot of my personal access to my own mental health and checking in with myself came through like journaling and just brain dumping everything that was on the page. And sometimes it turned into something beautiful and poetic. And other times it was just me getting everything from my head out of my head so that I can look at it and be like, oh, that's what's going on. And then also just being real with myself. And there were definitely times where I will never forget. I was maybe like 14, 15, and my mom asked me, she's like, "Are you depressed?" And I was like, "What? No." But like the answer was yes. And I just didn't know what I was feeling and I didn't have the words for all of it. So part of it was me educating myself and then also realizing that like, okay, maybe I do need more help in certain areas. Maybe I do need to talk to somebody. But giving myself the permission to write whatever was on my mind, whatever was on my heart, definitely gave me the bravery to admit when I needed help or admit when I'm not feeling it today.
Yeah, I like what you just said. It gave you the bravery to admit when you were seeking that help, right? Because at least for me in the Latino cultures that I've been around and that I was raised in, it was very taboo. Like to say that I'm depressed, it it it, it was as if I had a problem and we weren't looking for some of the root causes of that kind of stimulation, right? So I think about that. So I want to talk about before we get to some of your written work, which I'm really excited to for you to read out loud. I want to talk about how does your work translate in influencing, right, the communities of color that you surround yourself in, that you step into, that you share your work in, that you identify with, right? To enact change, right? And not just in mental health, but enact change in a general way. How does poetry create action or push us to take action?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think people forget that at the forefront of most social justice issues, at the forefront of most inequity issues, there are poets and artists and singers and writers who are like pushing the conversation forward. And sometimes it's literal, like you will literally see poets and singers and dancers at protests, but then there's also the backstory of I'm writing about this because it's important. And maybe I posted it on my social media and 1,000 people read it. And so by artists, I mean, I'll speak for poets. I feel like with us taking the time to discuss what's going on in current events, discuss what's going on in our personal lives, and then being bold enough to actually put it out there almost encourages other people to see it within themselves as well. And so it really does show itself in different ways. There's like the literal use of media that poets have access to, but then also by sharing, um, it opens conversations. And there are times where you may hear what a poet is saying, or as a poet, like I'll say something in a piece, or I'll say something in passing that I didn't think was very profound. And then afterwards, someone will stop me and have a conversation. And I've done the same thing so many times where I'm like, you said that one line and it struck me and I had this realization. And so it happens so much. And most of the time it's without even intending for it to happen. And so
And
it goes in so many different ways.
and I want to talk a little bit on poetry as a channel, right? To like meet the Latino community and where they're at. So poetry has a long history in our community, right? It's a in Spanish specifically, it's a romantic language, right? And I find myself sometimes just writing in Spanish or just writing in English, right? And sometimes I feel that what I'm trying to say in Spanish is what my family could understand. So
Hmm.
it depends on my context and who's listening, right? Um, in the past, I've seen poets use political spaces to try to make louder what the community wants to say, right? And like you said, these protests, our advocacy work are very much driven by artists. They're some of the first people to hit the front lines and say what the community wants to say out loud. And I can't remember the specific quote at the moment, but there is a quote that identifies the poet. Long time, I think there's like a 19th century quote that identifies the poet as the political, like the most important political figure of every community, right?
Hmm.
Because poets are called for action, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. How is poetry an effective tool to reach the community for spiritual care, right? Because again, the Hispanic, Latino community, we are very integrated within our faith, right? It doesn't have to be a specific church or doctrine, but we are integrated in our faith, and specific people in our families, like our grandparents, guide that, right? So I've written a lot of poetry about my grandparents because they've influenced some of that thinking. So what has it been in your experience as a spiritual tool? And then I want to move a little bit to your poetry and have you read, and we can talk more there.
Okay. So I grew up in a very religious household. I'm a pastor's kid, so I definitely have the spiritual aspect of it like on lock in terms of even the way that I perceive the world now, although my life is very different than it was in my childhood. A lot of the things that we learn will never leave us, which is also kind of the point. Like being raised in a certain way is that your parents have some assurance of like the character traits that you'll have. Um, and so from that perspective, I always see so many parallels between the arts as a poet and like the spiritual world and the religious world, because there there's poetry and there's song in all of our religious scriptures, like all of them. And if it's not obvious in the text, then you'll hear it in fellowship, right? When you're at a service of some sort, a gathering of some sort, within the music or the chanting or the ritual of it all. It's so artistic and beautiful and poetic, and it's very clear once you look at it through that lens. So I feel like poetry is an extremely effective tool because it's already ingrained in spiritual life and spiritual care as a whole. So I think approaching poetry as something that you already have access to makes it so much less scary. And you just got to realize that the access is already there. Um,
I
I know, like,
love that. I love that. Keep going. I love that.
yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, like, I know for me, from like being in a Christian household, um, all of Psalms is poetry and song, all of it. And Genesis is a gorgeous love story. And like you have um art in like scripture, and you see it in so many other faith texts as well. And so, yeah, I think once you look at it from that perspective, then poetry becomes almost like obviously accessible. And I think there's also a lot of, I know for me, I'm heavy-handed with spiritual themes because it's part of who I am as a person. And there are no rules really in poetry and in the art, so you can talk about whatever, and it's still just as powerful, if not more powerful, because of how personal it can be.
I love that. And what I wanted to say is one of the elements, or I guess one of the features of poetry that makes it even more accessible is that it breaks silence and it moves the whole body. So when I think about well-being and the health of a whole person holistically, I think about all of the tools that moves the whole body, that includes the mind, the spirit, the heart, the pain, the joy, the trust, the grief, and the no trust, the judgment, all of it, that includes the whole body. And poetry, like it has song, it can do that. It can move you for action, right? At a spiritual level first. It makes you think. It makes you reach an emotion before you take that step with trust and security, right? And I guess that's where faith comes in for a lot of people. Um, so I want to look at your poetry now because I've been rereading them and I'm like, I just want to hear it in her voice because it's a different experience. Like you said, you can read it in your head, you can read it in a silent voice, but once you say it out loud, um, you're reaching a different frequency. So I'm gonna have Melanie post your first poem. Um, she's gonna share it on the screen. Oh yeah, the creation story. Here we go.
Oof, this one hurts.
Let read and then we'll talk.
Okay. So I gave you guys a little context of my background and just being brought up in a very religious Christian home. And so as religious people and spiritual people, like sometimes you get angry. And so this was an angry poem that I wrote to God about God. And it still hurts because the emotion is so raw in it. But here we go. So this piece is called Creation Story, inspired by the poem Hypothesis by Paul Tran. I questioned if God was real or as loving as folks said after he took my mother from me. He took a woman who lived her life committed to sharing his goodness and mercy, yet his goodness and mercy were missing in my story. I asked why. I asked how. I asked if I could survive knowing the creator would demolish his greatest creations for the sake of nothing. That not everything is worthy of a full life cycle, even if they commit their full life cycle to his work. What even is that? I can't say. I witness too many cycles, ended in pain, ended without reason, ended for the glory of a being who doesn't need us, so why make us? Is it ego or zeal? What's the difference after all?
So raw. I have goosebumps. Like it's so raw because you force me as a reader and as a listener to really think about um my faith. Like can belief change overnight
Mm,
when I'm in
yeah.
such a place of, for instance, or of grief or anger, which is such an important emotion to not ignore. So tell us a little bit about this piece.
Okay. So I wrote this piece in a workshop. I believe the prompt was along the lines of questioning something that you felt was unwarranted. And I took it there because I was like, I'm mad, I'm hurt, I'm grieving. And I think a lot of people forget that there is so much nuance to grief. And it could be the sadness which is obvious. It could be the loneliness, it can be the anger. There are so many things that we don't even understand ourselves about grief. And it can look different for everyone. And so in this poem, I was kind of just questioning everything. And I think the title creation story is also ironic because, this is not a creation story. This is a story of an ending, of demise of some sort. And I think that there's, I mean, I don't want to go like too spiritual, but there's always so much nuance in every story. Like you think of like Noah's Ark, and it's like, wow, a beautiful, lovely story that we've heard where you're like saving the animals and saving the people. There's also so much destruction happening on the other side of that same story. And in this piece, when I read it within myself, I'm faced with that own with my own like contrast in the feeling. Because yes, I'm angry, but at the same time, I'm still talking to God about it. And like I'm still exploring my faith, although there's a lot of pain involved in this situation. So it's questioning, it's being unbelievably honest with myself and with the God who I'm talking to. And it's my number one intent, although I know that it sounds super negative and like anti-religion. My biggest intent is just to show that it's okay to question things, and it's okay to express whatever the feeling is, because it's part of being a human, and we were made with such nuance and such dimension that not exploring it is almost rude to the human experience.
Yes. And I like what you said. We're also made with such strength,
Mm,
right? And what poetry does is allow us to reflect and mirror that strength that actually came from us. So we see very loosely our autonomy and how we choose how we want to heal moving forward,
mm,
right? With that said, it makes me think about, yes, we have poetry, and as poets and as the people here, we know that we want to access support, right? And some of these conversations could look different when we're accessing support or trying to find out or getting a diagnosis for an illness, right? Which can be really scary. So I think about all these specific moments that we can face fear, that we're faced with anger, and that we're faced with grief, and that we're faced with questioning what we believe in order to receive an answer. And sometimes for me, I don't seek support because I don't want to know what the fear looks like in the end,
mm,
right? So poetry gives me that space to contemplate my fear and reach a conclusion that like, no, I need to move forward because I'm present and I'm human, right? So I'm gonna have Melanie, before we move on to the next poem, she's gonna shoot out the first poll, and and we'll share the results in the end. But I just want her to shoot out a poll, and then she'll put up your next poem, Claudia, and I want to talk about that one after you read. So here's your poll. What is the percentage among Hispanic adults who have no health insurance, right? And thinking about health insurance, we need health insurance. We need health insurance in the United States to have access to mental health care support, right? So this is pretty crucial. And if it's not enough, and if 100% of our Hispanic adults do not have 100% coverage, they're not getting 100% support.
mm,
And that is going to create more inequity, right? And more gaps and more disparity and a lot of intergenerational conflict, because we want to evolve and we want to accept change. And that looks like healing as a collective, right? So there's that poll, and we'll share the results a little later. So Melanie, I'm gonna have you post Claudia's second poem, which is also probably one of my favorite. I'm excited for this one. Your work touches just really raw questions, Claudia, that are tough to say out loud, and which is why writing poetry helps. It's like an ease into the pain.
oh, definitely.
And you can begin when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. A prayer for your safety. With every step outside, we're trusting to make it back home, and I pray you do. I pray for a peace you hold confidently but never have to use, that which precedes you, protects you, aura and object. May all sides be preserved and covered by assurance that no harm can cross the threshold of your divine fortress, even with dropped drawbridges and enticing moats. If alone and afraid, I pray you call. Our shared silence breeds awareness, unity, fine-tuned and amplified instincts. I pray you're never found too afraid to act. May you return with the sweetness of adventure on your lips. May you return whole, untouched, except by the sun. May you return. With the passage of this day, I say a prayer for your safety, and that someone has a prayer for me too.
Yeah, safety. You know, thinking about just a lot of the issues that is going around in the world, and that we're gonna probably see still coming. According to like a lot of the trends of violence and health inequities, people not getting access to health, right?
Mhm.
Care. I think about how many people do make it home safely and is going home without any support safe, is living in New York City without health insurance, for instance, safe. Is it safe? So I think about this piece, and when I read it, I felt like it was for me and for anyone who read it on their way home.
That's exactly where this came from. I don't remember exactly what was happening, but I know in my own experience, there have been so many instances where I'm coming home from work. I'm coming home from a poetry event. I'm coming home from seeing my father and doing things that are good for me. And I'm faced with like complete danger. And um, there have been, I'm sure many of us in New York know someone who's been killed by violence, someone who's been an unintended victim of said violence, someone who has, or even ourselves have experienced violence, abuse, harassment, etc. And that's exactly where this poem came from, because it's terrifying. And as a woman, as a Latina in the Bronx, like I knew since I was too young to actually know that it's not always safe for me outside. It's not safe for most of us outside. Um,
And people live outside alone,
right,
right?
because it's not only health equity and access in terms of healthcare, it's also housing. It's like the basic needs that are not being met, that when faced with that conversation, it's like there are so many different things that can play into what it is that I'm talking about with safety and just returning.
Oh my, Claudia, I feel like this poem could be somewhere, in the MTA when they put poems of and they never
Yes,
really
yes,
change
that is
them.
my dream.
Yeah, so I feel like a prayer for your safety is a piece that the people experiencing homelessness in New York City would love to read, that they would love to read, and that anyone normal, average person on their way to work or getting off work on their way home can read that and actually project that emotion, right, during that reading. And I think this is one of those pieces. So let's see if we can get it on there actually.
I
let's
would
let's talk more
love
about
that.
that in the future.
Yeah, I'm
Because
telling you,
this is
that's
a
been
piece for, I think about that population, Claudia, the population that is living in the streets, street homelessness, roaming the streets by themselves in the dark, not getting enough sleep, probably living with multiple illnesses or health issues that need management, and they're alone.
mm-hmm,
Loneliness can kill.
mm-hmm.
It can kill. So this prayer does not make me feel alone.
Oh, I love that. And I think there's also something to be said about um who who is included in like the majority of our homeless population in New York City, because you're talking about people of color, you're talking about veterans, you're talking about youth. There is an unspeakable number of young people under the age of 20 who are homeless, living in parks, living on the street, living in tents, huddling up together. And like it, for whatever reason, I've found that people who are like not from New York think that it's just like young people hanging out all night long on St. Mark's. And it's like, no, a lot of these people are all together on a little blanket on the street because that's where they're staying the night. And like, yeah, you're going to be out all night walking around and partying, but it's because you don't have anywhere to go. And it's like, you might see a bunch of young people just like together on the train, and like it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Where are they going? Nowhere. And so there's that aspect of it too, that I think that a lot of people don't even realize or don't want to accept that is true. And it's also a lot of artists. Like there's so many intersectional issues that go on when it comes to like safety, housing, the arts, and just like how all the isms play into each other. But I love this poem, and I have not shared it anywhere near enough as I probably should now that I'm having this conversation. But I
It
mean,
belongs somewhere where people can read it. It's a poem for the population, for vulnerable people. And that's why I loved that piece. And I think it's a good transition to your next piece, actually. Rest, I believe it's called Rest Your Soul. I'll
mm,
have Melanie put it up because I think when I read this piece and then I read this one, I said, wow, wow. So I'm just gonna let you read it.
okay, thank you. This one is another one that like hurts real good for me. And it's like perfectly on theme. Okay. Ooh, okay, rest for the soul. I was very young when I first realized that I am inhabiting a body. When I realized the bodies around me are also filled to the brim with stories, thoughts, secrets. When I realized that with each sleep, we gain the slightest bit of space for more stories, thoughts, secrets. When I realized that losing sleep is losing space. I was already full to the brim, and with every night I lost more sleep, I broke. I was very young when I first realized that turning off my body was impossible. I would get into much trouble. When I realized these stories, thoughts, secrets will have to stay with me forever until my body turns off on its own. There's no space for my voice outside these four walls, outside of my shrinking self. These four walls have watched me unravel like torn pantyhose, thread by thread, then all at once. And these four walls have watched me stitch myself back together again, page by page, by page by page. I was very young when I first realized that writing is rest from my soul. When I realized writing is where I put my stories, thoughts, secrets, and make room for more and more.
Wow. Writing is rest for my soul. And when I think of rest, Claudia, I don't just think of like rest to heal. I'm thinking about resting as a whole with other people. Um, this piece actually brought me to think about the importance of rest in recovery and how many people do not get rest and cannot fully recover when they're faced with health issues. And you talk so much about the body and inhabiting the body. And I wonder how personal is our relationship to our body when we're connected to health care services? Or how disconnected are we to a healthy body when we are not getting services, right? And
Yeah.
it's complex. I know that sounds complex, but it's actually very simple. Are you healthy when you don't have a relationship with the health system where
Mm,
you live? Can
yeah.
you rest?
Yeah, because there's also there comes into play like a mind over matter as well, where let's say like I don't have healthcare, something hurts. I'm turning that off. I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to think about it because I don't have healthcare. I don't have access to this. And that could be like physical healthcare, that could be dental health, that could be your vision, that could be your mental health. There can be so many different areas in which you realize that like something is off. But since I don't have access to something to help me fix it, I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. And so then that disconnect becomes so much deeper. It may start with that pain in your stomach somewhere, and then it turns into a complete inability to even connect with yourself and connect with other people. And I always say that, like, for me to be open and honest with others, I must first be open and honest with myself. And that also very much plays into the physical space that we're in. Um, and sometimes it's kind of trippy when you think about like, I'm here and you're there and you're also having thoughts and things. And when you start like allowing other humans to, or when you start seeing other people the way that you see yourself as like this living, breathing, existing person with thoughts and feelings and all of that, you're able to move with a little more empathy. And then eventually, hopefully, you're able to like truly connect and then kind of restart that process of checking in, making sure that you're well in order to help other people. And it also even turns out like it kind of also connects with burnout, uh, because you can be doing all this wonderful work for other people and then completely neglecting yourself in the process. And then you can't help others if you're not also helping yourself. And so all of these things like really do play into each other. And so finding rest and finding respite and finding ways to seek joy and release emotions is so important. Whether it's like physical health, mental health, emotional well-being, all of the things.
I love that. I love what you just had to say. There's I'm going to call it a campaign because it has the impact of what a campaign can do, but rest as a revolution. That's been a term just flying this year. I just attended a retreat titled "Rest as a Revolution" for yoga and meditation that I do on the side, and we talked about all of the rest that has not been given to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that when the pandemic began and when things shut down, there was a large group of people that felt they can finally rest because they didn't leave the house. When we started transitioning into working from home, people had more access to telehealth. So they can get support from their home for free while working from home and taking breaks, right? So the way health looked like, right, in the workplace, because you mentioned that early, not just health, but like we want to talk about housing and some of the other inequities that we're seeing disparities in. But having access to rest is also a gap in how
Absolutely.
people reach well-being.
Absolutely. I love reminding people that rest is productive. We're in a hustle culture, we're in a capitalist society where you got to move, go all the time. And I say that also, ooh, I'm gonna go there.
Okay.
As the daughter of a religious leader, I watched my parents work themselves to the bone to do good and important work without realizing and remembering that like rest is also productive. And like, again, as the pastor's kid, I'm gonna be like, God rested on the seventh day. Why are you not resting? Like it is productive. It is part of it's part of living. Like, we literally cannot function without taking those breaks, and without also giving ourselves the permission to take those breaks, because sometimes it's like a mental battle, just giving yourself time to put your feet up and sleep the extra hour or whatever the need is. But
I
yeah,
love
rest is
that.
productive. I always
So
tell people
this
comfort is my birthright. I belong in a restful situation.
So this actually, before I want to, so I do want to end with your last two pieces. So, but before that, I want to ask, right? Because I feel like we're transitioning towards that. How can faith leaders provide, right, their congregation with writing as a tool for positive emotional health? Because I feel that with our discussion today, we talked about poetry, the foundations of poetry in your healing, how you use it as a tool. And now I want to talk about how can we share that with the community, right? With a community that is so specific, that holds a lot of faith. How can this be a positive emotional health experience? Because that's what I'm experiencing here, right? Talking to you and reading your work, I am turning my pain and my despair, my grief and my sadness into something that will make me say, oh no, I can keep going today, right? So how can we help, right? Our community, the faith leaders in our community that love their community, that serve their community. You said it well. Your parents served. They served, they did good. How can we share that message with our community that sees mental health perhaps as something as taboo or scary, or they don't want to get near because we don't want to be called crazy? It's such a sensitive topic, but how do we do that? How can we do that?
Mm,
In poetry or writing? Is there room and space for these activities to happen at a congregation setting?
there is 100%. As someone who grew up in the church, as someone with religious leaders, like in the family, I think that I kind of hinted at it earlier. Um, Even using the faith text that you are ascribing to, like that you work with, there, I can almost guarantee there's a poem in there somewhere. And if you think about how those texts even came into existence, it's because someone, a human, was going through a lived experience that was so impactful that they just had to get it out there. They had to write it down. It didn't just stay as oral tradition. It's a reason why things were written down. Beyond the practicality of spreading things, there's also the physical release attached to writing that helps a lot. Um, and so I think as faith leaders, there is a lot of opportunity to incorporate poetry, incorporate the arts, incorporate writing as a way to talk about things that are difficult, as a way to encourage folks to express things that are difficult, as a way to build community within a congregation, let's say. And there are so many ways to do it. Like, you can find a poem on Google that is applicable to the message of the day, or you can invite poets to have conversations like this. You can invite all types of artists to have conversations like this. And recently, within the past like few years, I've seen a lot of faith-based groups doing like art events. And that's so exciting because there's an artist in everyone, and so everyone has a story to tell, something to say. So giving people access to it, like right where they're going to be, like if you know the people are there on a Wednesday, if you know they're there on a Sunday, give it to them where they are. And don't be afraid of it. I know it's kind of forward, it's like modern or whatever, but there's a lot of beauty and strength in moving with the rest of the world and not falling behind.
Oh, I love that. The way you just said, like that describes inclusion in such a beautiful way. Like there's a beautiful way, and it's beautiful to move with the rest of the world. I love that. I love that.
And there
So
are also other ways too, like you can, I mean, this is like a shameless plug. I teach workshops, right? And I
yeah.
know that there are a ton of other writers who also would love to go to a space, sit down for an hour and like encourage people to write about an experience. And it can be faith-based. It doesn't, it could not be faith-based. but the impact is still there, and like the potential for growth and healing is still there.
And to reach the human. I hear you. I hear you. Maybe that's another conversation, Claudia, that we can have. So amazing. So I want to move towards your next two pieces. I'm gonna call them July because they're
Ah,
two short pieces, and I felt like I was reading a slight entry, like a daily entry of some sort. So um, before that, I'm gonna have Melanie send out a second poll. And we won't take away time sharing the results at the moment. We'll share it in the end. And then we'll put up your pieces.
So the poll that I did in the beginning, that was the only one we
Oh,
had.
we have this, it's the next one. Okay, sounds good. So just let's post a poem. Let's listen to these poems.
oh my God, I love this poem. This is honestly probably my favorite poem I've ever written. And it does give journal entry because that's pretty much how it happened. Okay, this is July 5th. I titled it July 5th because when I don't have a title for things, I just give it the date that it was written. Okay. If it rains, you don't let it get you down. You grab your traje de baño and you dance debajo del aguacero. If it rains, you let go of your fears and hold on to your faith. If it rains, then there is life. Dance debajo del aguacero. I got to give myself snaps for that one.
Oh, yeah, because I still get a little bit of goosebumps when especially at the end, dance debajo del aguacero. Just ending with that. That's an action. That is an action. Go dance under the rain. Dance in what you're feeling.
Yeah,
Dance in it.
it's one of those like there's a lesson in everything is kind of where it comes from. And I wrote this when I was deep in my mourning process. And I was miserable and I was like, oh, I need advice, I need guidance, I need something. And it started raining. And I thought about like my mother as the Puerto Rican woman she is, like when growing up, especially on the island or like I know many of us can relate regardless of where we're from. It's like it's raining outside, you go play, like you play in it. Yes, and so Destiny in the chat said like dancing in the chaos, embracing, accepting, like yes, absolutely. And for non-Spanish speakers, traje de baño is your bathing suit, and to dance debajo del aguacero is to dance underneath the downpour. So it's not just a little sprinkle rain, it's like when it's coming down, like definitely when it rains, it pours kind of a vibe, like also learning how to find the joy, look for the fun, just push yourself sometimes head first into whatever it is that's going on. Because it's part of life. Like literally rain means that things can grow, but also like hard times happen in order for us to grow as well. And so it's kind of
I,
like the
I go
silver
back to
lining.
grief. Yeah, I go back to grief immediately. Like it's like take ownership. Take ownership of what you're feeling as in love it, right? And I think about all of the different kind of rain downpour that we experience. How much death did we experience during COVID? How
Yeah.
much loss? The burden of death is heavy in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And a
And
lot of that burden is being held by people of color and still with long COVID.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not to say that like to ignore it and to just be
Yeah.
happy. Like that's not it at all. Like it's sit in it. It's feel it. Allow yourself to be in that reality and then move with it, move from it, learn from it, do something instead of just being stuck in the pain, stuck in the grief, stuck in the trauma of it all because
It's action. It's action.
we experienced a collective trauma around the globe. And so definitely like putting action to whatever it is that you're feeling is so key.
I love it. Let's move to your next piece actually, and let's end it with a bang. And on a and because your piece is good, it's good. And I think this is a wonderful piece to close this discussion with. I really do. When
Okay,
you're ready.
thank you. Another fun one. I'm sitting here like, why did I send you these? Okay, July 3rd. I always try to make sense of everything. When things don't make sense, I can't process it. My doctor tried explaining it to me. Somewhere in my nerves or my bloodstream, between my heart and my brain, I don't have enough LB to break down my NFC. I always semi-process. She prescribes a daily dose of EHR. It's supposed to increase the flow of LB in my blood between my brain and my heart, allowing for easier information processing. I always try to make sense of everything. When things don't make sense, my heart can't process it. My youth leader tried explaining it to me. Somewhere in my nerves or my bloodstream between my heart and my brain, I don't have enough let it be to break down my need for control. I always rationalize, semi-processing things in my heart until things show themselves as rational and are processable. She prescribes a daily dose of everything happens for a reason. It's supposed to increase the flow of let it be in my blood between my brain and my heart, allowing for easier information processing. Honestly, it feels like a crutch sometimes. My heart and my mind and heart must be in agreement, and the drugs in my veins aren't helping.
Wow. Thank you so much, Claudia. I'm just gonna snap because if you're a poet, like if you're a poet and you are in the chat and you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself and just snap because we know the impact of a snap and we know what that means, or just put it in the chat. I hear you, Destiny. I see you. I see you. Snap, snaps. We know. And one hustle, one love hustle hides a knot. We have another poet in the building. Amazing. Thank you, Claudia, so much for just sharing your words, your wisdom, your insight, and what you've learned
Thank
just
you.
like over the years, because I see poetry as also as an archive of who we are, and it's like rewriting a history of emotion. This is a form of literacy, and we know it, and we want the world to see it too. Is there anything you want to share about that piece in closing? It can get personal, and I know that piece has some personal undertone in it, so I want to give you the space to share what you feel comfortable about.
Sure. I mean, it's clear in pretty much all the pieces that I shared that like there's always going to be the like religious, spiritual aspect to things. And so I, as someone who like admittedly doesn't have healthcare, this is like another perfect example of like we look for answers and we look for guidance and we look for support everywhere. And so you know, there can be so many different approaches to handling the same issue. In this particular piece, I'm talking about my own inability to understand and allow happenings to just be. And it's some anxiety in there. It's a lot of like overthinking that I'm touching on. And so it can be a doctor telling me I need drugs to help. And sometimes medication is the answer. So it can be that approach. It could also be a faith-based approach of like there are certain things that we just have to allow to be, and there are certain practices that we have to include into our lives in order to move forward with whatever it is that we're experiencing. And so in that piece, it's kind of the contrast of like what the doctor said and what my youth leader said. And in many ways, they were kind of the same. It's just like different ways to skin the cat, as they say. and it can be applicable to so many different situations. And I found it. I love giving myself a little laughter in there. And so talking about like the drugs in my veins, I can be talking about prescribed medication. I can talk about self-medication. Like there are so many different ways that we as people navigate our situations. And so just allowing it to be true and putting it into the world and just being honest about it then also allows others to engage in that.
Oh, I love breaking the silence. Is breaking the silence, leaving no one behind. We speak, others can speak, right? Because sometimes we have the words that others don't have, or someone else has the words that we've been trying to touch or say out loud. And to make sound with our pain takes a lot of bravery.
It does,
Yeah.
but everyone can do it. It's
Yes.
accessible, and I'm so glad that you are even having this conversation in such a public way, because it just shows that the arts are an accessible tool for our healthcare.
Yes.
As a
Yes.
poet, I mean, yes, be a poet, but also there are so many other things to tap into, so many other creative expressions.
I love it. Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you so much. I'm sure this is not the last time that Nidus will see poets. Everyone in here, I see other poets in here. So I'm so happy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nidus, thanks you so much. And you'll hear from us a little more, and we'll be sharing this work with other people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been so much
And yeah.
fun. Thank you.
Thank you. And Melanie, you have
Thank you,
one last
Claudia.
one, right? One last
No,
poll.
that was it.
Okay, we're
That
good.
first one. Yeah, thank you so much for talking with us and bringing us into your world of poetry. And I just really appreciate everything that you said, and it really touched me. And I'm really excited to have gotten the chance to meet you.
Ah, thank you. It's nice to meet you too. We've been emailing for like so long. It's nice to finally put a face and an energy
Yeah.
to the name. And thank you all in the chat.
Thank you all in the chat for coming. There's some people I know who couldn't make it, so they'll try to they'll have to see the live video, and we'll have clips going out, and you'll be informed of it all. Thank you so much for everyone coming, and just have a great day, and just take the messages with you and share it forward with your families first, and your community, your friends, and your coworkers, right? Bye, everyone.